Another double-digit Phoenix Suns win streak is upon us. I'm already giggly. It is 115-110, our final score today. A win over Minnesota on Friday. We'll break both down as the Suns head into a fun matchup on Tuesday night on national TV against the Brooklyn Nets. That's a ton to talk about on today's episode of Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a contributor at Suns.com as well as Dime Magazine, and a credentialed media member covering the Suns the past 5 seasons. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen each and every day. It's been fun lately, and we have more fun to get to. 10 straight wins. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform. We are growing everywhere. We are free everywhere. And the best way to keep us free is to help us keep growing. Look at that. Look how that works. You just listen, you just follow, you just subscribe, and that helps each and every little bit. Each and every little bit helps. So I'm sure there are some new faces and ears out there watching and listening. Welcome. This has been a miracle season right after a miracle season just ended. I don't honestly know, but it's a blast, and we had more great basketball this weekend, so let's get right down to it. A lot to get to with these games. I'm not going to go beat by beat like a typical recap. This is usually how I'll do it on Mondays when there's multiple games. So we had Minnesota on Friday. We had, of course, this Spurs game today. So I'm going to zoom out a bit, but it's very much relevant to what's going on here because we've seen some patterns, especially, during the win streak, but also since DeAndre Ayton has been out. And so I think it's worth looking a little bit more closely at that, which actually, now that I'm thinking about it, were those the same? Did the win streak start when Ayton left? I'm not actually, now I'm doubting myself. No, he won the Toronto game. He played in that Indiana game, and then he left during the Indiana game. So he started off the win streak much like he did during the last win streak. He's going to be in and out of the lineup, it seems. We'll see what happens on Tuesday. But the trends to look at here, because there are definitely some. So I want to get to Monty Williams coaching the All-Star game. I want to talk a little bit about what that means for his career, what that really, the rarefied air that puts him in. But I think we have to. I think we have to start with this backcourt because they've been playing their absolute tails off. They are playing near 40 minutes a game lately with Cameron Payne out, with Landry Shamet inconsistent. So keep that all in mind. They are playing a ton of minutes and willing this team to victory. They were down 12 heading into the fourth quarter tonight. They were down heading into the fourth quarter against Minnesota. And we all know the clutch numbers. It's almost old news at this point, which is crazy in its own way. But a couple other numbers, because what really got me thinking about this, and it happened again tonight, Booker takes 24 field goal attempts, is he has been taking a ton of shots lately. He has been taking 20 plus shots, it feels like, every night, if not 30 plus on some nights. And if you look, the numbers bear that out. So he has taken 23 or more field goal attempts in 6 straight games. 22.8 on average, which is just about 23 per game in the whole month of January. And he's at 28.2 points per game in that same month, obviously. So near 30-point scorer, much considerably above his season average, but taking a ton of shots to get there. Now, the field goal percentage has been okay. It's not like he's necessarily inefficient. It's just not something we typically see from him, and it's definitely not something we've really seen from him since Ricky Rubio came into town, since Monty Williams installed this 0.5 system. But when I went back and looked, you can actually see a pattern start to unfold here. So when DeAndre Ayton injured his ankle in November, you'll remember that as the beginning of the last streak, which is when Kaminsky goes crazy and career high for him and everything else. Book did not escalate his shot volume. He was still taking 14, 17, 19. I think he bumped up above 20 maybe once or twice during the half dozen games that DA missed at that time, which was about early November. But Book did not jump in that same way. But when you fast forward to when DeAndre had COVID, which was about a month ago, the same thing did happen. Booker took more than 20 shots. If not every game that DeAndre was out on the health and safety protocol list, just about every single game. So that's kind of fascinating. You can kind of, well, first of all, I mean, the elephant in the room, I suppose, is Frank Kaminsky, right? I mean, and JaVale McGee, because it just so happens that JaVale's absence coincided with both Ayton getting COVID and now Ayton getting injured. So I'm sure that had something to do with it too. The whole team kind of turned a little wonky, but you can definitely see that Book looked at what happened in those early November games and he looked, okay, the scoring is still coming from elsewhere, but we're missing a lot of our offense when DeAndre is sitting. That's obvious. So we took that into consideration when Ayton left the lineup again and basically took charge. And so you can see that evolution. It's not to say it's bad. Like, it's by no means a criticism, but it's just fascinating. It's just not a style we've really seen Book embody since Monty came here, and he's still succeeding. The team's still winning in spite of it. And maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a little bit of a going back to what that kind of feels like physically, the soreness, I'm sure, is a little different on those legs after a game like this, and to be able to read the defense and take 20 plus shots, but have as few of them be bad shots as possible. All that stuff it's a different style. And so it's cool to see Book kind of exhibit that a little bit again, but he's not the only part of the backcourt that's been impressive. You could make the case Chris Paul has been even better lately. 20 points, 19 assists tonight, and 8 rebounds, better than 50% shooting from the field. He's actually been playing more minutes than Book lately, which I guess should not necessarily be a surprise because it's Payne who is out, and he's, of course, the backup to Chris. So Paul, 40 minutes again tonight. He played 40, I believe, on the game before Minnesota. He played 40. He played like 37 against Minnesota. So he's been up there. But the crazy number that I came away with is he, after tonight's 19 assists, is averaging 10.3 on the season, which is not quite at the Steve Nash level at age 36, but is pretty darn close. And the more incredible stat here is this was Chris's 28th double-digit assist game of the season. The Suns have played 49 games. 28. All of last season, Chris had 29 games of double-digit assists. So he has almost matched his total of double-digit assist games in 49 games, like compared to what he did in 72 last season, which is just crazy. I think you have to basically make the case at this point. I mean, you have to say at this point, this is the best season that Chris Paul has had since the first year he played for the Rockets, which was another team destined for 60 something, mid to high 60s in wins, championship contender, just ransacking the NBA. This season has that feel to it, and Chris Paul is playing at that level yet again. He's been healthier, which might be the craziest part of all of it, but that assist stuff is just something else. And the fact that we were so impressed and almost surprised by what he was able to do last year at his advanced age after so many people had written him off, and he doubled down and basically got better this year. But of course, Chris is not one to take ownership of his own success even, and is often one to kind of deflect the gratitude there. So his goal all along has been to get Monty Williams into the All-Star game as the coach of what used to be the Western Conference team, but will now just be one of the two sides. And he did it. With this win tonight, the Suns created a lead over the Warriors that was unbreakable, and they will have Monty and his staff at the All-Star game in Cleveland. So let's talk about that, the significance of it, and what it means for Monty really as well. First, though, let's take one quick break. If I can. To hear from Built Bar. This year, make Built Bar part of your New Year's resolutions. You might be easing into it still. I know sometimes it can be a little bit to actually commit. So if you are still thinking through how to execute, how to get to that level of shape you want to be in, to get to the weight you want to be at, make Built Bar part of your plan. Built Bar makes it easy to stick to your resolution because it actually tastes good. You want to come back and try a Built Bar. You want to eat it. You want to take that snack. You want to do it before or after a workout because it actually tastes good. It's not too sugary, not too high in calories, but packed with 15 to 20 grams of protein. And there is a flavor for everybody, whether it's cookies and cream, peanut butter brownie, raspberry. There is something for everyone to love, and there's limited time flavors constantly cycling through. So go to Built.com, check out everything they have. Use the promo code LOCKED15 when you make your purchase to get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Monty Williams and his coaching staff will be in Cleveland for the All-Star game as the coaching staff of one of the two teams. I'm actually not too sure. I haven't ever really paid attention since they went to this format, how they assign the coaching staff to the players to the side, because they do the captain thing now and they have each captain just go out and pick a team. Maybe the player gets to pick. I actually do not know, but I guess it would just be the Western Conference captain, right? It would be the captain who came from the West, which I believe is LeBron and Giannis, if I'm remembering right. So that's probably how they will do it. Monty will coach Team LeBron, and Chris's dream came true. I mean, that was obviously, I don't fully believe Chris Paul that he doesn't care about all-star teams and everything else. This guy is building a Hall of Fame resume, and each one of those counts, and being honored by your fellow players and by fans is its own special thing. But that's what he said all along. He wanted to get Monty here. Monty has never done this. I believe once before in Chris's career, Byron Scott coached the All-Star team when Chris was in New Orleans before Monty was hired, and they had surged to the number one spot in the West at that point. But it's special. And Quinn Snyder coached the team last year, but prior to that, you were looking at basically a 5-year run of the coach for the West side being either Greg Popovich or Steve Kerr. So Quinn kind of broke the dam on that, but you also had Scott Brooks in, which was 2014 and 2012. I believe the Spurs were 2013. And so I guess if you say it was either Scott Brooks, Steve Kerr, or Greg Popovich every single season for almost a decade prior to Quinn Snyder getting it, then it really puts into context what it means for Monty to get this honor. It's not just happening to have the best record. It's really breaking through in a Western Conference that has had such a clear hierarchy for such a long time. So I just don't want that to go undervalued here, that it wasn't just Steve Kerr again. Monty and this team put it together in the first half, and I mean, very clearly finished above the Warriors. It wasn't like some tiebreaker or fluky thing that got them here. The other part of this that I wanted to just take stock of, because I think that, I mean, I don't know, maybe it is worth saying. I mean, the ways that Monty affects this team, the reason he deserves this is because everybody plays better under him. I mean, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that. I just got done kind of laying out why Chris Paul, this is sort of the best season for him. When you look at the defensive advanced numbers, the assists, the efficiency, everything else, the clutch play, this is his best season since he was in Houston, which was like 5 years ago. Devin Booker took his game to a new level under Monty Williams. Mikal Bridges has grown incredibly, impressively since he got here. DeAndre Ayton was hardly anything as a player before he got under Monty Williams. But then even the role players, Cam Johnson, Cam Payne, Frank Kaminsky, Dario Saric, everybody, unfortunately, except for Landry Shamet, has been, I mean, ridiculously good and way better when they got to the opportunity to be here. So I guess that is worth just putting out there, but I think we all know that. I don't think anyone listening to this podcast will not understand the value of Monty Williams, but it's a well-deserved honor. What I wanted to say, though, before we close out on this is that the Coach of the Year race, it's not something that I necessarily dwell on a bunch, and it's, not the sexiest award that gets talked about in the national media. You don't hear Stephen A. Smith and his guests necessarily chopping it up about the NBA Coach of the Year race on First Take, but he didn't win it last year. He won the Coaches Association award, but Tom Thibodeau won the media award. I personally kind of feel like the Coaches Association one probably matters more, means more. It's only happened a few times that the coaches split from the media, and it probably feels better to get that one. But those aren't the ones that necessarily get remembered in the same way. So I'm sure it would make Monty feel great to get the big one as well. And obviously, I think you have to consider Eric Spoelstra. I think you obviously have to consider Steve Kerr again. He's won it in the past, of course, but that will be hard to beat as well. I mean, if the Suns have a better record than the Warriors, then I don't think Kerr really has much of a resume. But then there's the sort of up and coming teams that tend to get really overvalued in this, I think, which are, to me, would be the Bulls, which would be Billy Donovan, the Cavaliers, which would be JB Bickerstaff, or the Grizzlies, which is Taylor Jenkins. And I think all three of those guys are probably the other members of the top five here. I wouldn't probably put Kerr there. I don't think this is necessarily his best coaching job, even though a lot of their role players have been excellent. This is really their two stars getting back to where they were and lifting those role players. So I would probably say Monty and Spo are probably 1A and 1B, just at the top of their conferences, making lemonade out of lemons with this miserable season with from a COVID and injury standpoint. And then I would probably say that the 2 seed has to be second. I mean, the Bulls are tied for the 2nd seed in the East. I would say that Billy Donovan has to be number 3 there. And then I would say Bickerstaff is probably 4, just with the amount of injuries that team has overcome and how young they are. And then I would say Jenkins is as impressive a number 5 on any list as you'll ever find. I mean, lifting that team to the 3 seed right now is nothing to ignore either. But I think Monty has a real chance at it. And it would be difficult for me with the fact that if it did come down to Monty and Spo, it would just be really hard for me to necessarily say that Monty shouldn't get it, that Spo should get it, because both guys we know are great. This is not going to probably be the sort of narrative caught you by surprise type of thing for Coach of the Year this year, because there isn't one of those teams. Tom Thibodeau, Monty Williams, both were that last year. But if it comes down to Monty versus Spo, well, both of those guys are the coaches from the past 2 NBA finals. So to me, you kind of have to defer to team success at that point. And the Suns currently have half of the number of losses as the Heat do. They have 4 fewer losses than the Warriors. Like, this is, I think, probably something Monty can really shoot for. And, maybe getting it from the Coaches Association and getting so close in second place to Thibs last year puts him a little bit behind and people get bored of it. But I think he really should be there, and getting the honor of going out to the All-Star game, getting that recognition, getting to be around the absolute legends of this game right now. That'll all be very special. I'm sure that Monty would have appreciated a little bit of a rest too, but he's not one to take any of that stuff for granted. I'm sure he will enjoy himself and learn something from these guys. So definitely a huge tip of the hat to Monty, to everybody on this staff getting to go do that, and to Willie Green and Darko Rajakovic as well, because they did not get to go. They've now moved on to Memphis and New Orleans respectively, but they're part of this nevertheless, even if they're gone now. All right, let's look forward. Initial thoughts. I'm going to preview this whole week of games against Eastern Conference teams in depth tomorrow, but I do want to give a little bit more thought to this Nets game in particular here, because I do think it's what people are talking about. It's probably the biggest test the Suns will face this week from a streak standpoint. And I mean, I'm not going to count them out for anything. This streak will be harder than the last one, because they're about to go on an East Coast road trip that features some pretty difficult matchups. But let's start with this Nets game, because I think it's probably one of the tougher ones that they will face before they get that streak to where they want it to go. But let's take a quick break first and then talk about that Nets game. Brooklyn actually played on Sunday, just like the Suns did, an earlier game. And unfortunately, they played on Saturday. They played against the Lakers. And I think a lot of people had circled that game. It was on ABC, everything else. They played against the Warriors. So why don't you just maybe completely stop taking anything that I say about the schedule with any sort of legitimacy, because I clearly cannot keep track. But it was a very good game. I actually did watch it, but I can't keep the team straight. Klay Thompson played very well late. Kyrie Irving put on a show, as he is often going to do. But James Harden missed the game with a hand injury, and I believe a right hand strain that kind of came up out of the blue. He was questionable, then he was a game time decision, and then they decided to sit him. So we don't know if he will play. We do know that Kyrie will play because it's a road game, and it is going to be on TNT, the Tuesday TNT stuff. So even if Harden doesn't play, but especially if he does, this is going to be a pretty marquee game. We have not seen how these teams look against one another with this version. I believe when the Suns played the Nets earlier in the season, it was just KD that was healthy, and the Suns won. Book put up 40 or so. It was that same trip when they played against the Knicks on Thanksgiving weekend, and I believe it was just KD who was healthy. I think Harden missed that game. So if it is Harden and Kyrie, that is very interesting. And I hate to always just do things from a sort of matchup perspective, like who's going to guard who and all that, because it's not always super accurate. The Suns switch so much. But, we know Mikal Bridges is going to be very involved, and we know that the Suns don't always have a great success with that second perimeter defender. If it's a very dangerous guard, it can be difficult, So Bridges to me is I would say Bridges is more likely to guard. Well, here's a couple ways that they could do it. I'll go, if Bridges guards one, here's what would happen. If Bridges guards the other, here's what would happen, assuming Harden does play. So if Bridges guards Kyrie, which would allow him to be involved in the majority of the pick and rolls, I would think, and Kyrie's probably the slipperiest, quickest player, which the Suns tend to like to have Mikal on, then that would mean that I would actually think the Harden matchup might actually be handled by Crowder. That seems kind of interesting to me, because if you do look back to that last game, Brooklyn against the Warriors, the starting lineup that they had was Patty Mills in there for Harden. So let's say that it is Harden. So it would be DeAndre Bembry, Kessler Edwards, and Nicholas Claxton in the starting lineup around those two stars. You could easily put Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and DeAndre Ayton, or Bismack Biyombo, whoever it would be, on the other three guys and not worry. Like, you could put Chris Paul on Kessler Edwards, you could put Devin Booker on DeAndre Bembry, and you could put Ayton on Claxton or Biyombo on Claxton and feel pretty okay. And then you get the physicality of Crowder on Harden. You get the shiftiness, the athleticism, the length of Bridges on Irving. You can switch everything a lot easier, because if they set a big man screen, let's say Claxton screens for Kyrie or something, you can switch to have Ayton on or Biyombo onto Irving. And that's not ideal, but you can do that. And then you can have Bridges on Claxton, or you can have the drop, and you can have Biyombo or Ayton hedging a little bit to put a hand in Kyrie's face. And then you have Bridges chasing around the screens. If Kyrie and Harden ever run actions together, you could switch and feel okay with it. That feels pretty good. If Bridges guards Harden, then I would say that Booker would probably guard Irving, would be my guess. And then you could have Paul on Edwards probably, and then maybe Crowder on Bembry, since Bembry's kind of a bigger guy. He doesn't play a ton of minutes, but you also have James Johnson and Bruce Brown and those guys who are also pretty big. You could use Crowder's physicality on those matchups. You could still switch pretty easily. Brooklyn makes that really, really smooth because they play so small and play a lot of similarly sized guys. So it's not the worst thing in the world. The Suns have obviously faced matchups like this before. It is not going to be something new for them, but anytime an opposing team has two or more dynamite perimeter scorers, the Suns don't always have a great answer, because they don't have two Mikal Bridges. They have one, and most teams have zero, but the Suns, as much as they wish they could clone him, they do have to get creative if there's another weapon on the opposing team that needs to be accounted for. So those are some of the things I'm looking at. I also, as I tend to always say, unless Bembry or Edwards is going to do it, the Suns, the Nets do not have somebody to guard Devin Booker. They just do not. If Ayton were to come back, he was questionable for Sunday's game. He could return. Then the Nets have absolutely no answer for Ayton physically as an athlete in the pick and roll. Claxton could be that, but he's not very consistent. Blake is not that. Aldridge is not that. So that could be something to really swing it. JaVale McGee would do some similar damage. So that's probably some of what I'm looking at from a Nets perspective. And then obviously the Suns' perspective is kind of just handling the defensive assignments. But talk a little bit more about that game and the rest of this upcoming East Coast heavy part of the schedule. This home game against the Nets, but then followed by an East Coast road trip not too shortly thereafter. So we'll get to all of it throughout the week. Enjoy the game, or enjoy the win, I should say, over the Spurs. Enjoy 10 straight. Enjoy your Monday, and I'll be back with you to get you ready for Suns Nets on Tuesday. I will talk to you guys then.